What if mermaids aren't myth? What if they are a hidden branch of human evolution? Stories have been told from sailors, ocean goers, explorers, and storytellers for centuries about half human, half fish creatures that are seen in the depths and in the oceans. So, what if they are real? In today's video, we're going to dive into the biology of the possibility of mermaids existing and being somewhere out there in our oceans. So grab some popcorn, grab yourself a drink. This is a long video. We're going to get into science and mermaids. Chapter 1. Breathing in water. Humans have long since been fascinated with the very thought of mermaids. We are incredibly curious creatures and we are interested in other species on our planet. Animal Planet produced a mockumentary called Mermaids, the Body Found, which amassed 3.6 million views. And many people that watched this documentary or mockumentary thought it was a documentary and thought it was real. And so it shows our keen interest in this topic and in the possibility that mermaids could be real. There are many people who found it quite funny, who didn't sort of believe in it, but there were people who did. And so today we're going to explore the topic in some depth to try and see if mermaids could actually exist in our world. And so the first sort of very obvious question is, how would they breathe in the water? So there are two main methods of breathing in water. One was chosen by fish early in their evolutionary history, and this was to have gills. So gills are vessel-dense projections that are protected by a flap of skin. Now, it's very, very thin skin inside of the cells because you need to be able to diffuse the oxygen and the carbon dioxide through these really sort of thin vessels. The ocean and water in general has a lower oxygen concentration than found in air, and so that gas exchange needs to be incredibly effective. And so the gill structure, the many sort of gills that are found inside of gill plates that are protected by this gill cover, is there to allow the fish to allow water to pass their gills and for that gas exchange to happen. So oxygen leaves the oxygen-rich water around the fish and is drawn into the fish body, and CO2 that is in higher concentration inside the fish body leaves via the gills. And so the gills are one of the main ways of breathing inside of water. But fish are not the only creatures that breathe in water. There are mammals that breathe in the water, kind of. So we're going to get into how mammals breathe in water now. Marine mammals have more myoglobin inside of their blood than we do. Now what this does is it means that they are much more efficient at exchanging oxygen when they are breathing. So they can hold on to more oxygen inside of their cells, and they deplete that oxygen inside their bodies at a slower rate than humans do. So because they are large creatures inside this low oxygen environment, they have got genetic adaptation to be able to hold on to more oxygen and to use it as they need it. Additionally to this, the myoglobin-rich cells hold a charge, more so than found in humans. And so this enables that gas exchange to be much more efficient. It happens at a better rate, allowing the marine mammals, when they do take a breath, so marine mammals will usually come up to the surface, they will take in a deep breath, and they will hold that breath. So marine mammals have lungs like we do, and so they hold on to that, but that gas exchange happens at a much more efficient rate for marine mammals. When we think about swimming ourselves, we think about taking a big deep breath in, holding that breath, your lungs are full of oxygen, and then slowly releasing that breath. So for most mammals, breathing is involuntary. Our brain controls that process for us. So there are certain bodily processes that, quite thankfully, our brain takes over for us, that we don't actually have to do it, because trying to breathe every sort of couple of minutes would get exhausting pretty quickly. We wouldn't probably get anything else done. But for marine mammals, this is not the case. Marine mammals can control their breathing, so they know when they want to take a breath and when they don't want to take a breath. Another great adaptation for marine mammals is they do not have that same reflex to breathe that we do. So if you think about, the last time that you went swimming, or the last time you were in a body of water, and maybe you put your head under the water and you try to do that thing where like you hold your breath for as long as you can. You're like, who can hold their breath the longest? Just spoiler alert, I always lose. I am useless. I could definitely not be a mermaid. But we have this real drive to draw in breath, like you feel that pressure, you have to take in breath. So you need to come up to the surface to take in a breath. Marine mammals don't have that same reflex. And so when they are breathing, when they sort of slowly lose or use up their oxygen, they do not have this desperate need to take in another breath. So when they're coming up to the surface to breathe, this is not like a panicked, I need to breathe experience. This is just oh yeah, it's time to breathe. I better go and do that. And so they have this like relaxed experience of breathing inside of the water that we don't share. As marine mammals will need to breathe while they're sleeping, how do they do that? How do marine mammals sort of sleep and not die? How do they not drown? So marine mammals have this incredible ability to be able to shut down bodily processes. So when they are at rest or when they need to rest, they can shut down their bodily processes so that nothing is kind of really functioning. So their body is then at rest. And you see this with certain whale species. They actually sort of look, they sort of lean or exist upright. It's hard to imagine just being able to float in sort of a space. But they sort of float upright. And what they're doing is they're shutting down all of their bodily processes and just allowing themselves to just float there. And so they're not using any energy, so they don't need to take that breath. Certain dolphin species have the ability to shut off half of their brain. So, which is just absolutely wild to me that they can do this. So they turn off half of their brain, they allow one half of the brain to go to sleep, the other half of the brain to sort of just be in control, so they still exist and do what they need to do, and then they sort of swap, which is crazy. So they have this crazy ability to be able to use parts of their body at certain times and allow other parts of their body to rest. So if mermaids were... if they do exist, if we come to the end of this video and we decide that biologically it's possible, then there are two possibilities for our mermaids breathing. They will either need to have gills, or they will need to practice some sort of breathing method very similar to marine mammals. So either of those two possibilities are an option. Chapter 2. Seeing in water. Vision is based on how light passes through a medium and into our eyes. The shape of your lens determines how that light reaches the back of your eye to your retina, and then your retina sends a signal to your brain. So light passes through air more quickly than it does water. So our lens has a more concave sort of shape, and that shape allows the light projections that are coming in to go into one narrow point and form a single point at the back of the retina. So that allows all of the light information that we receive to go down to one point and we can see it. Now, light in water travels much more slowly. And so what needs to happen for fish is they need to have much more spherical type lenses. Because the light is travelling so slowly, in order for them to get to a single point, the light needs to travel through a much more curved surface to allow for this narrowing down, for them to be able to have a single point that goes to their cornea, that goes to their retina in the back of their eye. So fish eyes, that's why sort of fish eyes look like bulgy. They have this like really curved exterior that is to allow that light to sort of pass through. Due to the different ways that light passes through water, that has enabled fish to develop lots of different really cool adaptations to be able to see and detect light in low light levels, but also to have some UV light visibility as well. So fish can see a broader spectrum of light than we can. So when fish are looking at each other, they don't look the same way that we think they look, because we are looking at them through different vision, which I always think is really interesting. I absolutely love perspective and how different sort of things we'll see. The other thing we need to think about when we look at fish is that their eyes are lateral. This means that they are on the side of their heads. This is usually found in prey species, but it allows the fish to have an almost completely 360-degree view of their environment. So when they're sort of swimming through, they can sort of see almost everything around them. Other different sea mammals also have lateral eyes. So when we look at dolphins and whales, their eyes are also on the sides of their heads. There are very few sea species that actually have eyes at the front of their head. So in the terrestrial environment, forward-facing eyes, binocular vision usually refer to predators, and lateral vision usually refers to prey. However, in the ocean it works slightly differently. So sharks still have their eyes on the side of their head, yet they are one of the apex predators of the ocean. And so eye position is a little bit difficult to sort of determine. Now, drawings of mermaids from sailors and storytellers all show binocular vision. They show a female creature with eyes on the front of her head. And so mermaids have potentially retained their binocular vision that they maybe got through their evolutionary history, but demonstrate sort of the same vision as fish do. So mermaids likely have much more spherical lenses to their eyes, so their eyes would have this more sort of bulging type appearance, but they would also potentially have some sort of low light level detection, so they'd have a lens in the back of their eye, very similar to cats, where they would be able to see in depths and in dark waters or in very sort of low light level conditions. Chapter 3. Movement and anatomy. If you sometimes feel like you are under pressure, imagine being a mermaid. The pressure of water is so great that humans, we cannot cope with it. And although we have built vessels to try and explore the depths of the ocean, we can't really get down there. We can't really sort of get people in there and get down there because we can't handle the pressure. So how would a mermaid handle the pressure of deep sea? This is where I can get excited again, because again we come to genetics. One of my favourite topics is genetics. Genetics to the answer. Genetics has the answer to everything as far as I'm concerned. So let's look at some fish genetics and see how fish cope with deep sea living conditions. So fish have got some incredible adaptations. The adaptations in the proteins of fish allow them to withstand the pressure and avoid compression. There is a molecule called the TMAO. I am going to attempt to tell you what TMAO stands for. It is trimethylene N oxide. Thank you. What this protein does inside the fish is it allows them to withstand the pressure of compression. So it keeps the fish to have their fish form and for them to be able to swim around. You know, I mean, not all deep sea fish are flat, right? You know, when you look at the anglerfish, when you look at lots of other deep sea fish, they still have this sort of spherical type shape that fish sort of have, but it is the proteins inside the fish that enable them to withstand compression, which is just absolutely incredible that they can do that. But what about marine mammals? Do they have this same adaptation? So for marine mammals, things are slightly different. Now, if we look at whales, there are certain species of whale that can dive down as far as 3,000 meters under the ocean surface. Humans can get to about 20 meters and we tap out at that point. We would risk it getting ill. When you go deeper and deeper down, not only is it the pressure on you, but you can also get sicknesses due to air and things inside of our bodies. And so we need to whales need to have certain adaptations to be able to cope with not getting things like the bends and not getting sickness from going up and down inside of the water column. One thing that whales do is to collapse their lungs. So as I mentioned earlier on when we were looking at breathing, whales don't have this same reflex to breathe that we do. And so in order for them to be able to dive down in the water and not have gas pockets that can cause them the bends and cause sickness, they collapse their lungs and then they dive down and they basically hold their breath. But it isn't the same as the way that we do because they don't have the reflex. So they hold their breath and they dive down. The other adaptation that mammals have is inside of our skulls we have cavities. So our sinus cavities are air-filled cavities. The same thing is applied to marine mammals. However, with marine mammals, that air cavity could cause sickness if they were to sort of come up too quickly, and so they have adaptations in their sinuses to prevent getting the bends from having air-filled skulls, which is just absolutely crazy. So adaptation to their environment has taken over and enabling whales to be able to dive as deep as they do. So it is likely that our mermaid has some or both of these types of adaptations. Because they would be half mammalian and half fish, potentially they have the same proteins as fish that enable them to withstand the compression, and they probably likely have this more voluntary breathing practiced by mammals. Because we don't see mermaids all the time coming up to the surface, that would sort of tell me that potentially they would have gills rather than having lungs, but potentially they have both. Potentially they use their gills for the majority of their gas exchange, but then when the oxygen deprivation is getting sort of quite low, you know, when the CO2 maybe is building up a little bit too high, maybe that is then when mermaids would come up to the surface and take a breath of air. And at that point, maybe they have lungs. And so in order for a mermaid to be able to dive, I think it's quite likely that they would compress their lungs, they would have adaptations in their sinuses, and they would also practice gill breathing. And then that's coupled with the adaptation in the proteins would allow them to cope with much more pressure than I can cope with. As we are talking about diving down deep and adaptations, how would mermaids swim? So the body of a human and the tail of a fish wouldn't really be very energy efficient for a species. The drawings and stories of mermaids have given us this tail structure that is much more similar to a dolphin style swim pattern, so where the mermaid would sort of lie flat and then her tail would go up and down, rather than in fish where it would go sideways. And so she would need to have quite a lot of muscular structure and a solid spine to be able to cope with that level of adaptation. So the way that dolphins and other mammals are able to sort of swim and to sustain themselves is their muscle structure and their spine column is different to ours. The way that the muscles are connected to the spine gives them much more power to be able to swim constantly against that resistance of water. You know, if you think about trying to walk through water, it's much more resistant than air, and so you would need much more muscle to be able to cope with that level of adaptation. So our mermaids likely have an awful lot of muscle to be able to allow them to swim and project themselves through the water, but it is possible. It is absolutely possible that they would have that muscular definition. It exists in mammals already, so it is probable. But with that, doesn't mean that our mermaids are beautiful, slender creatures that we sort of see drawn everywhere. That part is probably unlikely, because what we need to look at now is the thermals of water. Water is incredibly cold, and humans, we cannot cope with that level of cold. We cannot cope with the cold of the water. It would kill us. And so a mermaid would need some sort of way of being able to cope with the cold. Now, one way that marine mammals currently cope with cold conditions is to have blubber. They have fat layers that are able to keep them warm when they are inside of the water. So in order for our mermaid to survive the cold conditions, she is likely less like the slender, beautiful, small-bosomed mermaid that we see in drawings, and more similar to the opera-performing stunning mermaid from Stardew Valley. Chapter 4. Reproduction and species survival. Marine mammals practice sexual gene transfer, lactation and vivipary. Fancy words for males and females come together. They have their genes come together, mix and produce a baby. That baby is born live, so vivipary, and the mother practices lactation. She feeds her baby. So that is something that is performed by mammals. Now, fish have various different ways of being able to reproduce. Some of the more common ways are laying eggs en masse and having sperm released en masse, and you hope that those eggs and sperm, so those gametes, so gametes is the term for like the sexual release of like eggs and things, so like eggs and sperm are called gametes. So the connection of those, you're kind of just hoping it's going to happen, a little bit like trees, I guess, that just release their pollen and hope it lands on a female tree so that they can make baby trees. So that's one thing that fish do. The other thing that they do is that they have their eggs and they lay their eggs in one place, and a male will release the sperm in one place. So they sort of are protecting their own. You know, you've got like a couple, a fish little couple, and they come together and they have all of their eggs in one place. The eggs develop, and the baby fish, the fry, are all born, and they just go for it and hope that they survive. So that is sort of one thing that is practiced by fish. So with our mermaid, because our mermaid is half human and half fish, which one would they likely do? So let's break down the anatomy of a mermaid. So mermaids have breasts. We see this in all literature everywhere. With her shell bra, mermaids have breasts. Breasts are designed for lactation. There is no other purpose. There is no need to have boobs apart from for feeding babies. Now, that tells us one thing. So that tells us that this species feeds their young because they have the ability to be able to do it. Now, why do men have nipples? Why is it that men have nipples if they don't feed, and if breasts are only there for feeding? So in development, nipples are produced before the sexual orientation of the organism is established. So before the body has decided whether this is going to be a male of the species or a female of the species, the nipples are already produced. It's just whether the tissue behind it to produce milk develops or not. That sort of comes after the sexual orientation is established. So that is why males have nipples as well as females. But breasts would suggest that the mermaid is going to feed her baby. What that also tells us is that the mermaid can only have a maximum of 1 or 2 children. She wouldn't be able to feed more than that from her own body. And so it's very unlikely then that she would produce eggs and have her eggs fertilized. She would not be able to support that many young. But also, her body would need hormonal signals to produce milk, which means she must develop the baby inside her body for those hormonal signals to take place. So in humans, once you have given birth, you are flooded with hormones, and those hormones tell your breast, it's like, okay, we need to go, like we need to feed this child. So the mermaid likely experiences the same thing. So mermaids likely practice sexual reproduction. They carry their child within the body. They then give birth to a live baby, and then they feed their baby. Now, because the mermaid has a powerful spine and all of this muscular structure inside her tail to be able to swim, I think it's likely that she would give birth to a small, slightly underdeveloped baby, and the development of the young happens outside of the body. A little bit like what happens with humans. We give birth to a baby, and that baby, let's be totally frank and honest here, is completely useless. It's a potato. It totally relies on you for everything. When you think about other animals that give birth, giraffe that just give birth standing up and their babies just fall and then just start walking. It's wild. But lots of animals, when their babies are born, the babies are able to fend for themselves. When fish hatch out of their eggs, they instantly need to swim. They instantly need to go find shelter, protect themselves, hide. They need to produce little shoals so they can all sort of stay safe. They have these instincts. They know to do these things. Human babies don't have that same instinct. They're a little bit useless. So I think the mermaid would have something very similar. In order for her to be able to give birth, her pelvis is going to be slightly different to a human pelvis, given the fact she has a tail. But she would likely have a small vent inside the tail structure somewhere, that she would need to give birth through, and so it would stand to reason to me that the baby would be small to pass through a much smaller birthing canal, and she would likely then only have one baby at a time. For their survival, a species needs a certain number of breeding members. So populations cannot sustain themselves on very few numbers. You experience something called random genetic drift. Now what this is where mutations happen naturally inside the body, but in a small population those mutations are exaggerated, and so it produces a bottleneck. What this means is that there are no longer enough viable breeding members to be able to sustain the population. So a population is calculated by the number of breeding members. Now, in order to be able to sustain a population, there needs to be 500 breeding aged members. So you can still have young, you can still have elderly, you could have 20,000, a million, a billion in your population, really doesn't matter, but you need to have 500 unique breeding aged members to be able to keep the population going, to prevent inbreeding and random genetic drift causing the collapse of the population. Chapter 5, Habitat. Lots of people travel the oceans, and we don't have photographic evidence of lots of mermaids. So you might think, deep sea, maybe caves, that type of thing. The resources and the pressure down in the deep sea would be so high that sustaining a large population might be challenging. So it's much more likely that mermaids would live in more tropical waters, somewhere that bit warmer to help with the thermoregulation. And maybe where there's like big kelp forests, somewhere where they can hide. It must be a species that is able to hide away from humans to be able to not be seen. So more likely they live in more sort of shallow type waters, even though we don't see them. So it's interesting. It's difficult to try and establish exactly where they would live. With that said though, it is possible. Much of our oceans have been unmapped. 71% of our beautiful planet is covered in ocean, and 80% of that ocean is unmapped by humans. So we haven't even scratched the surface on what is in our oceans yet. So it's possible. There's huge areas of the ocean that have been undiscovered. And scientists have estimated that 91% of species are yet to be discovered in our oceans. Now this calculation, it's quite a difficult thing to try and be able to calculate what we don't know exists. And so taxonomists use what we do know against the rates of new species that we are finding all of the time, and then they scale that up to be able to calculate this 91%. So that's where that comes from. So with 91% of species undiscovered, it's possible that mermaids are down there and we haven't found them yet. Or maybe we found them years and years ago, which is why there are stories of them, and we just haven't seen them since. So either they could have gone extinct, or we just haven't found them yet. Chapter 6, Diet and Ecology. What would mermaids eat? Now, with the eye position of mermaids being on the front of their head, that indicates predatorial behaviour. So they are likely predators, so maybe eating fish and crustaceans and other organisms. With them being half human and half fish, could very well be that they're more omnivorous, so they might eat kelp or seaweed or plants and things that they find inside of the ocean as well. So it would all depend on their body's physiology and what they would need. Now, because they are powerful swimmers, they are likely to be fast as well. They would need quite a lot of energy and quite a lot of calories to be able to fuel that. Not only that, they would need a lot of protein to keep their muscles strong and repair them when they're damaged and things. So they do likely lean towards a carnivorous diet, whilst also taking in some forage materials that they would maybe find. Because they have hands, they're likely to be able to gather. They would have that dexterity that we have to be able to use tools and things to be able to hunt their food. They maybe have claws on the ends of their hands like we have nails to be able to grab hold of their food and keep hold of it for them to be able to consume it. Meaning they're likely sort of finding something that's swimming by and reaching out and grabbing it. They, because of their front-facing eyes as well, their binocular vision, they also have very good depth perception, and so being able to swim after and hunt down your prey is likely something that they're able to do. Through evolutionary history, humans have built a body that is able to withstand long distance hunting. So back in the day, we didn't eat every single day like we do now. We would go for long periods of time without consuming anything, but hunters in our civilization previously would be able to out stamina their prey items, and so it's likely that maybe the mermaids do something very similar. Perhaps they hunt together, but they are able to tire out their prey and then consume them. Chapter 7. Communication and intelligence. Communication in water is tricky. Sound travels a very different way inside of water to how it does in air. And so verbal language, the language that we would practice, wouldn't work inside of the oceans. So mermaids are very unlikely to speak in a language that we would be able to determine would be language. But that doesn't mean they're not communicating. We're just starting to unravel now the complexity of language of marine mammals. So the clicks and the deep and different vocalizations practiced by marine mammals, we're starting to realize now that those are some really interesting different vocalizations that they use for different situations. So vocalization is possible, it's just different. It's just a different way of communicating. As mermaids would need to rear their young in a similar way to the way that we do or apes do, it is highly likely that they have a method of communication. Now that communication, I think, would likely be more visual than it would be auditory. Because they would have good eyesight and they would be able to see different things, it makes much more sense to me that they would use visual cues. They would use a visual way of being able to communicate with other members of their group. And so body language, I mean, we practice body language, humans talk with body language all the time. And so using body language is likely the main method of communication for mermaids, with maybe some vocalizations that we would understand to be a language, that they perhaps practice maybe when they're further away from each other, or to maybe send out signals. But what does this tell us about intelligence? Does this tell us anything about intelligence? So intelligence is a topic that I find really interesting. Lots of humans for a very long time assumed we were the only intelligent species and that nobody else was as intelligent as us. However, we have started to realise that other species are just as intelligent, it's just in a different way. They communicate with each other, they organise themselves in groups, they use tools, and so those are all indicators of intelligence, and it is displayed by sea creatures. Dolphins are so intelligent. They have a real depth of vocalization, but they also use tools to be able to help them. Octopus are a whole vibe. If they are having a bad day or they're in a mood, they're just going to go around punching fish. And humpback whales create bubble nets to make it easier for them when they're hunting. They will create a circle of bubbles and drive all of the fish into one area to make it easier to eat. Is that not a demonstration of intelligence? Many marine mammals live in large social groups where they are effectively communicating with each other all of the time and organising themselves. They are there to protect each other and also for resource gathering. Certain marine mammals, like seals, live in large female groups with just one male, and the males will fight for competition. And in others, we have males and females that live interconnectedly, like in pilot whales. So the ways in which that community is formed inside of the ocean is very different and very varied. With our mermaid, it is likely that they live in a community group, that they live with other members of their own species. Now that could be that they live in a large group with males and females. Maybe they live in a large group and males just come in for the purpose of breeding. Me personally, I have a bit of a hot spot for Ariel's dad, and so I love the idea that mermaids just all live together collectively in a nice group. In order to do that, they need to be able to organise themselves, they need to be able to communicate with other members, they need to be able to build a civilization. So that denotes both communication abilities and also intelligence inside of our mermaid species. Chapter 8. Predators and Defence. Even apex species have predators. The mermaid is likely a prey animal to things like sharks, orcas, and giant squid. The predators likely go after the younger members of the population or the elderly members of the population, very much like what we see in nature. Given the muscular structure of the mermaid, the the strength that they would have, they're going to be very fast and very adept swimmers. They are also likely to have a lot of flexibility because of this unique body structure that they are likely to have. So they're going to be able to weave and wind their way around and into smaller spaces where maybe larger, bulkier predators can't go. So I imagine that they're able to evade capture quite well. In addition to this, as we mentioned in the communication section, where the mermaid is likely to use visual cues, maybe she has a skin that flashes or changes colour, or these types of things, it likely means that the mermaid is able to camouflage itself. If mermaids don't use their skin to flash and to camouflage for themselves, it could very well be, like what we see with terrestrial mammals, that the very young have a skin structure that means that they can hide. Perhaps they have banding, so they look like seagrass. It's likely that the very young in the population have a different skin colour to when they are an adult member. But it would make sense for mermaids to be able to change their skin coloration to be able to evade capture. Another possibility that we see quite widely in the ocean is the use of venom. With mermaids having human-like hands, they likely have claws on the ends of their hands. Their fingers likely terminate in a claw. So they could potentially use these claws to inject venom into predators that are attacking them or prey that maybe they want to eat. It could very well be that the mermaids practice something which is seen inside the oceans, where the fish that they consume or the organisms they consume that have venom, the mermaids can take that venom into their body and use it as their own form of defense. This is seen, and probably the most famous case is the nudibranch. So it's this absolutely stunning looking little sea slug. It looks like a little dragon, but it eats things like the Portuguese man of war, which is wild that anything would try and eat that thing. But it eats it and it uses that venom then for its own defensive purposes. So mermaids likely practice something very similar as well themselves, where they consume creatures that have poisons that they then need, that they would then use themselves. In addition to this, they likely outsmart their predators. They likely have an intelligence, and so outsmarting their predators is probably more common for the mermaid, but they would have these defensive properties as well. Chapter 9. Evolutionary pathways. There is a fringe theory called the aquatic ape hypothesis. Now this suggests that in evolutionary time, a subspecies of human spent so much time in water that they evolved into half fish, half human type organisms, so our mermaid. Scientists don't support this, but the theory is out there, so could it exist? This is where we come to something called convergent evolution. What this is referring to is organisms that are totally different, totally unrelated, but they have evolved in a very similar way to a different species. So for example, because that was confusing and complicated, I get that made no sense, but an example is flight. Birds fly, and we know that birds fly. However, bats also fly. Now bats are a mammal and birds are a reptile, technically. That's a whole thing for a different day. But both of them evolved the ability to fly, but they are not related to each other. So you can have species that get the same type of adaptation to an environment through their evolutionary pathway. It can just look slightly different. Some fish species do have arms. They're not quite like ours, but they use them in a similar way. So for example, the mud skipper, when it finds itself out on the sands or the sediment, it can crawl across the water using its arms to get it into the next lot of water. So there are some little ways in which evolution could have led to a mermaid species. Evolution is simply an organism's way of adapting to its changing environment. So as an environment changes, you need to get used to those changes to be able to survive. And so it might mean that your body needs to change in order to survive. That's evolution. It takes a long time for some species and it's very rapid for other species. Fish species have evolved to have fins. This was the most effective way of being able to move through an aqueous type environment. It doesn't make any sense for fish to have arms and legs like ours, because our limbs are not very effective for swimming through the water. Yes, we can go swimming. Yes, we can enjoy swimming. However, we're not as good as fish. Like, let's be real. Let's just be real for a minute. They've adapted their environment. So it could very well be that an ape species has gone backwards through evolution and has evolved to have a tail for it to be able to swim in water, because that it found itself in a more aqueous environment. That was a more effective way of moving through the water. But maybe it retained its arms because there were periods of times where it needed to climb out, or it needed to grab hold of something, or it needed that dexterity that arms would give it. So the evolution has driven a humanoid species to have a tail for effective swimming, but arms for locomotion needs as well. It isn't uncommon to see a species going backwards. So originally, for whale species, they were a land organism. So through their evolutionary history, they left the water, they went to land, they developed arms and legs and all of the things they needed to live on land. They got out there and then they were like, you know what? No, thank you. This is not for me. I hate this. And so they evolved backwards to go back into the water. So whales have done that evolution. So it's possible. It is entirely possible. We still see the remnants of their former land-loving selves inside the bone structure of whales. And so an evolutionary possibility is that an ape, like an early hominid species, went to the water and evolved adaptations for water survival. Chapter 10. Myth meets science. Mermaids have appeared in almost every culture, from Antarcticus, the ancient Syrian goddess of the sea, Ea, a Mesopotamian god of water, wisdom, magic and creation, Ningyo, a Japanese creature from folklore, Merrows from Irish folklore, and Sedna from Inuit folklore. Many cultures have a mermaid or mer creature type organism. This is either a god or a goddess that is associated with water and the life-giving blood of water. Sometimes these are seen with a tail, sometimes they are seen without a tail. Some are seen as organisms that live in the water to either keep you away from the water so that you stay safe and you don't drown, or to provide things for you, so you need to give them offerings. So they can be seen as like a fish with just a face. But many cultures have got their own tales of mermaids. Now either these have been seen and the story of mermaids has been passed down through the generations, or people just think to themselves that if you were going to live in water, or you were going to be a god of water, you would be a half fish and half human hybrid. Now, I don't know which is more realistic. I don't know if it's more realistic that ancient people saw actual mer people and carried that down through the generations and passed it down through folklore, or that people would imagine a half human, half fish creature. Don't know quite which way of the argument I sort of stand on here, but mermaids are ubiquitous across the globe. Most civilizations have got some sort of connection with a mermaid or a mermaid story. But scientists and ecologists would say that that's not the case, and what people are seeing are manatees or dugongs. Christopher Columbus travelled the oceans and reported seeing mermaids and mer people. He extensively travelled, and so when scientists then say, oh well, it was just a dugong, it was just a manatee that he saw, is that possible, or is it that he saw a mermaid? I know they were travelling out long periods of time at sea. Maybe they were going a bit crazy, maybe they were imagining things, but out in the open oceans you wouldn't see a manatee there. That isn't where they live. So manatees and dugongs have very specific needs, and they wouldn't be found just out in the depths of the open ocean. So I'm not too certain, but certain skeletal structures that have washed up on shore, or organisms that have sort of died away and their bones have been left on shore that people have thought were mermaids, have been found to be manatees. So potentially sightings of mermaids are actually just manatees and not mermaids. Christopher Columbus did say that he did see mermaids, but they had a more masculine face than he was expecting. Could a manatee be confused with a masculine faced female? I don't know. Maybe? Who knows? All of that to say, though, that humans have long been fascinated by the possibility that mermaids could exist, that they might be real. In the 1800s, for whatever reason, I have absolutely no idea what would possess a person to do this, but a Japanese fisherman took a fish and a monkey, and he sewed the top half of the monkey to the bottom half of the fish and made a thing. I don't know what he was trying to do. Maybe he was early Frankenstein. I have no idea, but he created this thing, and it was dried out, and it was known as the Fiji mermaid. This Fiji mermaid was purchased by the infamous P.T. Burnham, who was somebody who had a sideshow where they would take people and the Fiji mermaid with unusual characteristics around so that everybody could sort of pay to go and see them. And so the Fiji mermaid went on show, and people absolutely loved it. They were fascinated. So back in the beginning, when we were talking about the mockumentary with from Animal Planet with the mermaid, all the way through history we have reports of mermaids, and then in popular literature today we also have lots of mermaids. People are fascinated by the very possibility that they could exist. Chapter 11, conclusion. So in conclusion, could mermaids exist? If we look at it purely from science, the answer is that it is unlikely, which as a scientist kind of makes me sad. I kind of wanted them to be real. I think we have shown through this conversation that there is possibility. There is the possibility that an organism could exist. They could be adapted to their environment. There are ways of it working. Genetically, evolutionarily, it's possible. So I think even though science itself would say no, I think with the vastness of the oceans being totally unexplored, with an intelligent species that has maybe been able to evade being seen up to this point, I think we could say that it's possible. We have created gods in our own likeness, but we have also created half animal, half gods in the past. Potentially we have just created something through evolutionary history of our own species as we've been trying to understand the world around us. The world is a complex and confusing place, and when you're trying to make sense of it, people have created creatures to just sort of try and explain the things that they're experiencing. Potentially that's all that's happened. People are trying to understand the depth of the ocean, the vastness of it, and so they have just created a mermaid in a human fish likeness to be able to understand the world. And so from a social perspective, potentially they also don't exist. We have just created them to be able to explain things that we otherwise just can't get our head around and that we just don't understand. But the ocean is big. The ocean is vast. We haven't explored it all. So they could exist. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I know this was a long video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed a deep dive into the deep oceans and the possibility that mermaids exist. If you have enjoyed, please give me a like, give me a subscribe. I know everybody's asking for these things again. I watch a lot of YouTube myself, and it's like it went out of trend to ask, and now everyone's asking again. But I am trying to grow. I would like to grow. I want to do this for you. I want to put out some really cool science content. So let me know that you like it by liking the video, and then I know to keep doing videos like this. But let me know what you think. Do you think mermaids could be real? Was there anything in this video that made you think like, actually, it's a possibility? Let me know in the comments below what you think, and we will see you on the next one, where we're going to do a deep dive into another fascinating topic, looking at whether an organism could exist. Let me know what organisms you would like me to cover. If there's anything, I don't know, ghosts, skinwalkers, werewolves, what would you like to see? Let me know in the comments below, and I will speak to you very soon. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.